So Fairouz, we're sitting here after an incredible weekend of musical magic, the Aga Khan Music Awards 2022. Tell us, how do you feel?
Exhilarated.
Yeah.
And incredibly happy, because the most gratifying thing about doing something that so many people told you will never work and will never succeed and is not needed, but the most gratifying thing about proving them wrong is watching not just the brilliance of the artists, but just the brightness of the audience's reaction. And one of our intentions is always to put on stage musicians of the highest quality. It doesn't matter what kind of music they play. When, I'm very often asked this question, what kind of music do you like?
Right.
And there's two kinds of music. There's good music and bad music. It can be rap, classical art, it can be Kabuli art music, it can be raga, it can be anything. But it is either good or bad. And what we do within the Aga Khan music program is we only put on stage the music of the highest quality, because what it does, and this weekend has proven it beautifully, it touches the hearts and souls of the listeners, no matter what cultural background they come from.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I mean, I think we were listening backstage. We had goosebumps. It was exhilarating. For people who may not be as familiar with the awards, can you tell us about how the Music Awards started, the history, how are they conceived?
Well, the Music Awards do not have a separate history. They have a history that is very, very intimately and logically connected to the beginning of the Aga Khan Music Initiative and the Aga Khan Music Program. And so what happened in mid to late 90s, His Highness the Aga Khan, who really is at the very root of the creation of this program, and for who many years I think he was the only one who really believed not only that it will succeed, but also I think he was the only one truly, with Prince Amin by his side, who could foresee not only the impact that this program would have, but the actual need for it. Mm-hmm. The need for it within the very communities that we serve, because the communities that we serve have never regarded music as simple entertainment. Right. It's something that has always been a way of life, a way for history to be passed down from one generation to another, and also for customs, norms of behavior, stories of the very land that people protect and call their homeland. Music is an integral part of the lifespan of that, the fabric of life of this community. And when, during the mid-90s, His Highness started visiting Central Asia, mm-hmm. which was at that time, it was just recovering from 70 plus years of the Soviet rule. And it had its independence, but it was pretty much the only thing that it had. They didn't have the civil code, they didn't have the financial code, there was no experience in dealing with the outside world. And presence of a multi-level development body such as AKDN was something that the countries of post-Soviet Central Asia really welcomed with open arms. But as it always happens with our client communities, it's the economic development part of the network that was really the most welcome, because pretty much every activity that ACFED and economic development institutions of AKDN could offer, there was so much need for it that it was really welcomed with the open arms. And the social development part was very much tolerated, because why not? There was universities and kindergartens and activities for women and NGO support. It's okay. The culture part, as always, was viewed as a permanent burden on somebody else's budget. And what His Highness has been doing for decades now is proving consistently through the work of AKTC, the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, that when it's properly looked after and when it's properly invested into, culture not only stops being a burden on somebody else's budget, but it really becomes a trampoline from which all the other activities can grow. And so in the late 90s, two things happened in two completely different parts of the world. In Central Asia, His Highness and AKDN made the commitment to the region, a long-term commitment to the region, and each of the activities of the network had to be represented, so cultural part needed defining. Mm-hmm. And many thousands miles away, in the United States, a brilliant virtuoso cello player, Yo-Yo Ma, established an organization that is now known as the Silk Road Project. And the idea behind it was remarkable. It was to bring together new faces of music creation in the lands of the ancient Silk Route. Of course, there was never just one Silk Route, there was many of them, but it's a poetic name, so we all follow it and overuse it and abuse it. And the idea really was to bring together the most talented composers from those lands and let them create new music that is inspired by those ancient traditions. And I remember being incredibly enthusiastic in the beginning of those meetings, and by the end of them, I just couldn't comprehend why something that was easily created by a composer from China, Iran, or India could not be done by a composer from Central Asia or Afghanistan. Because the creations were simply not, they were not at the same level. They were not, and it was a mystery to me at that point because I didn't know really fully the background, especially in arts and music education in those countries. And what happened, of course, is that because this music is the very fabric of communities' life, because so much of it is devotional, it became dangerous. Because when a new type of citizen needs to be created, ironically, in the East, it's the music that needs to be taken away. Because it takes away the musical memories. It takes away that very cohesion of the community. And once it's broken, once the memory is broken, it can be filled with something else. It can be filled with other memories. So the reason those composers were failing in creating music that is tradition-inspired is because the venerable art of Ustad Shagird, the master apprentice, has been destroyed. And in the countries where it has not been destroyed, it was modified and tampered with to the point where it became unrecognizable. So with the absence of good quality arts and music education, there was no new creation. There was no new generation of artists, nor a new generation of audiences. So our job in the beginning was extremely simple. It was to find the masters who still had the ability to pass on their knowledge and craft and give them administrative and financial means to teach. It was as simple as that. We started with a network of schools that had 100 students. And it now has, I would not be able to tell you how many of them we teach now, because in largest country of Central Asia, in Kazakhstan, this method that we've helped create has now gone nationwide and is available to every single secondary student in the country. But the first role was that. It was just education. The second is that when you see that the respect for this tradition has fallen down to the very bottom, at the very country where the tradition comes from, because it didn't bring financial viability, it didn't bring respect. So parents were not encouraging children to study traditional music. And what we had to do was to bring back that respect. And very often respect at home comes from the recognition abroad. So we started the presentation program and brought this kind of music to the stages that were never afforded to world of folk or traditional music. So in New York, we went to Carnegie Hall. In London, we went to the English National Opera. In Paris, we went to Théâtre l'Odéon. The stages that could never present this kind of music suddenly were brightly lit and sold out, because we also presented it, if I may say so myself, in a rather cleverly fashion. We used the latest gadgets available to us from the world of technology to animate the tradition that was not in any way familiar to the Western public. And it truly was a success. So that's when the parents started knocking on the doors of our schools, because it suddenly became interesting. It suddenly brought fame, it brought recognition, it brought a complete change of social status. When a student from Darb al-Ahmar in Cairo, one of the poorest areas that the city of Cairo unfortunately has, when a kid from that community, just through studying at our music school, becomes one of the most famous and recognizable artists in the country, that is really what makes the queues in front of the doors of the music school grow. So education, first level, presentation, second level. Third level was very logical. It was production. We had to produce this music, and offer it to those who wanted to purchase it and bring it home with them, but in a legal fashion. Everything else was either pirated or very low quality, because this was not a music considered of interest to the general population. So production was the third step. The fourth step was mentorship and constant commissioning of new music, which came with fusion. And fusion has become an extremely bad word in the music world, in the music industry, because when you think of fusion, you think East-West and you think bad, because there's so much bad fusion, and because fusion became this sort of Eastern-Western concept. But it hasn't been so historically. Historically, musical fusion is something that's always existed. The artistic communities that shared geographic borders shared their food and their music instruments and their conversations, and that's how a dutar from Tajikistan, from Barbaria, ended up in China and is called pipa. So the musical fusion is never is not something that's new or recently invented. What was important for us, though, was to recreate East-East fusion and ensure that it was good quality. So that was level 4. And that was level 4 together with music commissioning. What became clear then is that we can only develop the tradition in a very limited way if we just continue to preserve it. But to really help it grow, we had to open the doors. We had to go to the neighborhood regions. We had to encourage the conversation that wasn't happening naturally between the artists and artist communities. And that's when we became aware of all this extraordinary richness and diversity of talent of artists in the global East, that we were not in any way reaching through our schools or through our presentation programs, for a very good reason. It takes 30 years for a music school to become independent. So we couldn't simultaneously offer that commitment to the schools, but at the same time look at all over the communities that were in one way or another shaped by Islam. We couldn't look at all of them. So the Music Awards became really an answer to that question, because only those who have not benefited in any way from our support in the past are eligible to apply and be nominated for the Music Awards. So that's the creation of the awards.
I love that. I'm so in awe of you, Fairouz. I know you talked a little bit about some of the impact that you've seen. It's been 20 years. You said 30 years to get a music school independent. Yeah. What's some of the impact that you're seeing now that you're 20 years into the program? The Music Awards are established. These 5 steps are well under their way.
The single most important element. Well, I think it's twofold, actually. Okay. One is obviously creating this family, this music family that I never imagined would grow and develop so brightly. But it has so many facets. Besides the actual artists, it has educators, producers, and inventors, and creators, and disseminators. It's something that's grown and that grows every day and keeps getting larger and keeps getting younger. Mm-hmm. And it's now so multifaceted that it just never stops to fascinate me. So that's one. But where you really see the impact is when you have truly contributed to the creation and development of new cultural leaders of the community. So when the kids who came to our academy back in 2003 have now become director of the National Conservatory, director of the National Symphony Orchestra, director of the National Makam Orchestra, director of the National Radio and Television, this is when you know that you've truly reached your audiences, because their perception, their respect, their attitude towards the music of their ancestors has completely been modified, changed, enhanced, brightened by this passage through the music school system that we've helped create. And that's when you really see the impact. So never give up. Absolutely never give up.
Such an incredible job.
Not a job. Never needed a job. Always needed the passion.
I love that. I love that. It's come so far, from its inception in the early 2000s. what is next? Like, what's going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years? How do you see the program evolving?
Oh God, I'd like to know what will happen in the next 2 weeks, because I think the changes that society has gone through in these past 2 years, they've been so enormous and so unimaginable. Everything that could not have been imagined actually happened, not necessarily in the brightest way. And underline once again that this exchange between the artist and the audience has nothing to do with entertainment, has everything to do with healing, has everything to do with spirituality, has everything to do with cleansing, enriching, find any other reason. Entertainment is just not part of it. So what I hope we will be doing 10 years from now is still putting out toolkits that every kid in the country can use if they want to instantly get access to the way to study the tradition of their land. And what I also want to happen is that I want every country in which we work, in which we do the activities of the music program and now the music awards, I'd like this music, the music that's considered old generation's tales, I'd like it to be considered incredibly cool. I'd like rap songs or whatever replaces rap in 15 years. I'd like them to be inspired by the music of the ancestors. And judging by the quality of the Kyrgyz rap on the market right now, we are in for an absolute treat.
Thank you for sitting back down with us. I know it was an eventful evening, so appreciate
Absolutely.
you coming back.
Thank you so much for having me, Ba.
Of course. So before we took a break, you were talking about how this isn't a job, it's a passion. Can you tell us a little bit more about your own career journey, how you became the director of the music program?
Oh, it's a simple story in a way, but I think it's an interesting one because it is about passion. I was brought up in a diplomatic household, and I did not really see another career for myself. I grew up in this golden age of diplomacy, and I saw the real power, the real ability that correctly put diplomacy has and could have on the lives of the communities that required the impact, that are in the middle of the conflict. And there was not even a question, I think, in my mind. So I did everything as I was studying. I did everything that is required of a future diplomat, including music. So knowing how to play a musical instrument, knowing how to speak languages, how to dance properly, it was all part of the diplomatic training. But when I graduated, the world had changed, and the Cold War ended. The states have the balance of power shifted completely, and the grace, in a sense, went out a little bit of diplomacy. There was the actors on the world stage have changed, and quite frankly, I found myself in a position where I wasn't quite certain which country I wanted to serve. Because one thing that is required of a diplomat is that the idea of a service is non-negotiable. But there is a very clear objective to that service, and I no longer had one. And so I then decided to give the international diplomacy a try, and became a UN staff member, first in New York and then in Geneva, and very quickly became disenchanted with the little roles or big roles that I was asked to play, because I felt a very small part of a very big machine that was turning its wheels no matter what. And I was struggling to find the place for my own impact, and also to measure it. I couldn't find a single mechanism to do that. And I kept trying different departments, and I was still very, very young. I had my degrees early, and the beauty of youth is that you don't really see the obstacles in front of you. You really feel the pressure. You feel that you have very little time, and you need to achieve something in a very quick amount of time that's available to you. And so during one of those very frustrating rants that I was having about not being quite sure where to go, I happened to share thoughts really on what needed to be done in the region of Central Asia specifically. And one of the people who heard that particular evening was His Highness. And I got a call very soon after saying, all of that, what you said, I'd very much like to see you do it, but not for UN, for me. And it really was, now when I look back at it, I think, what did I think about? But it was a huge decision because first I gave up on this idea of diplomacy, and then UN was a disappointment for me. UN does incredible projects all over the world that make an incredible impact in the lives of the communities that are benefiting from that. Mm-hmm. But my own personal experience wasn't satisfying. It wasn't, I probably was in the wrong place and in the wrong time, which very often happens, and that's what led me to taking the path that was completely untraveled for myself. And what led me there, even though I was probably full of fear, was first of all His Highness's passion, which could not be hidden on any given day. The passion for the service, again, that because one thing that is drummed into your head when you study diplomacy is that service is sacred. Mm-hmm. You deliver what you have been asked to do. You just find a community, you find a beneficiary. And his passion for delivering the tools of service to the communities that are in so much need was absolutely irreproachable. The second thing was the clarity of his vision. He saw things that none of us could even draw on a map of the distant future. But he saw it clearly. Not only did he see it clearly, he saw it in great details. He saw it in the details. So I really would struggle to name another leader who has this remarkable ability to both see this extraordinary picture of the future, but see it in the tiniest little details that keep changing lives of everyone who experiences them. And I was hired for something that had strictly nothing to do with music. It was the University of Central Asia and education primarily. And in the midst of all that, the Aga Khan Music Initiative in Central Asia was created. And His Highness dropped it on my lap one day, telling me, take a look at it. And it is truly the biggest gift that he could have given me. But his force of leadership is such that once he is able to give you a goal, there is truly very little that can stop you, just because the result that he has described is described so clearly that all you need to do is just get there, attain it, see the happiness, see the faces of the people who benefited from that. And so it's a gift, truly, it's a gift to just follow this kind of leadership and to have, for example, have a tiny detail. He would, whenever he could, when we were building the music program, he would never miss a live performance. Absolutely never. He would come to every single concert, to a recital by the students, to the recital by the grandmasters, and he would sit and talk with the artists, no matter which part of the world they were from, to truly understand what is it that they needed the most. What is it that was missing? What was the best way of getting there? And honestly, the kinds of insights that he would gather during these personal conversations, when he would not hesitate for 1 second to sit, to drop down on the floor with an Afghan rubab player who would tell him the story that this Afghan rubab was buried for a very long time because there was a choice of destroying an instrument or burying it. And that particular one, that was in a concert in Paris, and I remember it still had dust from when it was taken from underneath the earth. And he would His Highness didn't hesitate. He just, he sat right down on the floor next to the master, who was old and frail, but he still had the ability to teach. And in a space of 5 minutes, we pretty much got the understanding of what needed to be done in the next 15 years.
Incredible.
But only he is able to do that.
On that note, Fairouz, how would you, this year we're celebrating 65 years of Hazrat Ramzi Mamad. How would you describe his legacy in the world of music?
I'll tell you what it is. It's his willingness that he never compromised, a willingness to acknowledge the rightful place that music has in the communities that in any way have been shaped by Islam. Because this place is disputed in so many parts in the East. And the clarity and the force of his conviction, not only to recognize that rightful place that music has in the Eastern communities, but also to support it, to teach it, to put it on stages and to celebrate it. That unwavering determination to do whatever it's needed, to put the resources, to put the people, and it didn't matter, and it still doesn't matter how many years it will take, but that, the willingness to recognize how much music does for a community, for a society, that to me is something that is unprecedented.
I love that. If I may, I'd love to ask you a personal question. So as someone who's, studied music in university, sings in a rock band, just as an avid, patron of the arts, what advice would you give to young musicians to help achieve the vision that you just articulated, and how can we contribute to that?
Oh, what a beautiful question. What to do is usually not really the problem, because those who truly carry music in their hearts and in their souls, they don't usually have a choice. They have to continue doing it. It's not something, I'm sure that very often musicians want to break, and they often do, break their instruments into pieces, do something completely different. But the choice has been taken away from them. They were given the gift that is primarily a responsibility. It's a gift to heal, to teach, to uplift, to cleanse, to guide. It's a gift. It's something that is no longer yours. I'll tell you a funny story. When we tried putting this music onto the stages in the Western world, and one of the stages that I really wanted to get this music to was Carnegie Hall, because Carnegie Hall, of course, it's something that. So we assembled the whole series of musical performances from Central Asia, Middle East, North Africa, from our regions. And Carnegie Hall accepted it, I think with a lot of intimidation and a lot of fear, because they've never put anything on stage. I keep a photo in my office of that poster announcing the concert at the Carnegie Hall, and then a big sticker slapped across it that said sold out. And I keep that poster because no one, either on the Carnegie Hall side or on our side, believed that we would sell out that hall on those several consecutive nights. But that was not the lesson. The lesson came from two artists. One, a Mugam master from Azerbaijan, and another one, a Manas, an epic story reciter from Kyrgyzstan. So the first one, I showed up and asked him to give me program notes for the performance, because Carnegie Hall asked for program notes. As you would when you have the Mahler Symphony, you present the audience with the program notes. And this beautiful person who is Alim Kasimov, who has this voice of pure liquid gold, looked at me with a twinkle in his eye and said, "You want me to tell you what I will be singing 6 months from now?" And I said, "Yes, Ustad, because we have to print it." And he said, "Well, how would I do that? Because I need to come on stage. I need to ask permission from the Almighty to perform. I need to look at the audience and try and understand who is sad, who needs to be healed, who's celebrating something. And when I've gathered all of those needs from the audience, Almighty will speak from me. I will just be a vessel that will deliver what needs to be delivered. So your 6 months program is really nowhere to be found. And after that, I had even a better lesson, because then I went to our Manas reciter, and he said, I can't make it. I said, really? His name was Risbeck, I'll never forget him. And I said, it's Carnegie Hall. He said, I'm not available on that date. And he's a shepherd, as well as a Manas reciter, but he's also a shepherd and a peasant. And I said, well, what are you doing? He said, well, 2 villages down from mine, there is a Manas reciter competition, which is annual. And my great-grandfather always participated in it. And so did my grandfather, and so did my father. And now I am there, and I'm teaching my children. So I will not be at the Carnegie Hall. And that opened so many facets to me, because for that man who literally carried in his lungs and in his brain the memory, the collective memory of his community, Carnegie Hall was not only very far, it was also at that particular moment completely irrelevant. Why am I telling you the story? Because Hazar Imam always says that even before you begin the project, you first need to understand that it's, firstly, truly needed by the community, and secondly, can be carried away by the community, can be owned fully and completely. Because if you start something and then 20 years later explain to them that it was actually built for them, that's not going to have an impact. So understanding what is truly needed, designing the correct toolkit to deliver it, and then going, leaving, and letting your beneficiaries become the masters of the process. If there's one thing that AKDN taught me, it's that.
Thank you for sharing.
For after all, art is a matter of humanity, just as much as it is a matter of identity. As the Islamic tradition has reminded us for many centuries, the divine spark that bestows upon us our individuality also bonds individuals in a common human family. In this light, we learn to see our differences in a new way. We can understand that cultural diversity is not a burden or a threat. In fact, it is rather a divine gift, an opportunity to learn and to grow, an opportunity to understand and to appreciate the identity of the other, and thereby one's own essential identity.
So as a final kind of closing question, how do the awards and the program contribute to the identity of the Muslim world?
By showing the highest quality of an artistic achievement and the impact that it carries. By putting it on stage, by celebrating the achievements of the artists that are not always apparent to the public outside, by giving it its rightful place, and truly by showcasing the artistry and the mastery that is not known or not available anywhere else in the world, and reminding the rest of the world that some of the most beautiful legacy that we have and some of the most beautiful creations that we today celebrate, be they in medicine, astronomy, spoken word, architecture, or music, have historically come from the East. And when we think of the East today, and when we think of conflicts and abject poverty and the influence that carries in it so much negativity, by showcasing the beauty of the artistry and the quality of it, we connect the dots and we celebrate its place in today's world, not only in the region of its birth, but truly worldwide.
Thank you so much.
Anytime.